back live in the studio with our guest this morning on Viewpoint, Dr. G. Dennis Campbell, one of our great instructors at Lincoln College. And Dr. Campbell, we're not only talking about batty subjects, but bats in Pacific. And we have a place up here on Sugar Creek that looks in the future, and gosh, I hope I'm here to see that fruition of that. I think we will. We're going to have some bats and bat houses, but we're going to have a lot more up there at your Environmental Studies Center. Let's talk about that a little bit, Dr. Campbell.
Sure. In fact, to make the transition, a lot of people like to kind of support animals that are important for our ecosystem. Bats don't necessarily choose mosquitoes. Things like martins and birds will do that really well in the evening. Bats go for moths, but then again, moth, caterpillars, rootworm, and some of the problems with our corn. So they do feed on animals that we just absolutely need bats to help us keep the negative pests under control. And an environmental center likes to celebrate natural areas, and I'm all for people wanting to put up bat houses. Now, maybe you've seen that little design, kind of a small wooden box, a little slit, and the bats squeeze up in there, and they think they're in a small attic and will sit there. Well, a lot of organizations try to sell that to perpetuate the let's protect bats, but very few bats use that because we don't know where to put it. Bats have to find it. Bats might not like the orientation of it, might not like the heat in it.
Bad neighborhood.
Bad neighborhood associated with it. Might worry about cats. There's a lot of things that that doesn't work. But again, I'm still for it because it says here's a person who cares about native wildlife as much as their normal life. Well, Bill, you mentioned if we had a property, the college owns some farm property near Sugar Creek, and I've gone through some permitting processes of converting 5 of those acres to education. I'd love to have bat houses there, small ones to illustrate to the general public and kids visiting that this would be a good thing, and just be able to start talking about bats. But there is a new communal bat shelter that is being proposed by the Bat Conservation International out of Austin, Texas. Oh, they're great.
Are you teasing?
No, it's a great group.
You're fun in this.
Oh, no, this Bat Conservation International is just world-renowned protector of bats. I don't think we've mentioned 2011, 2012. This year is the International Year of the Bat by the. That's right. It's just an odd thing that somebody's.
Couldn't we get together?
The United Nations decided to call it the Year of the Bat versus a lot of other things we have going on in our world.
Year of the pizza or something.
That's right. But they have come up with a community shelter. I call it a condominium, where it's much larger. It looks almost like a pergola, but a covered a portico. It looks like a big shelter high up on poles, and they would have baffles in there so the bats can squeeze up there. And my understanding is the bats much prefer communal living if they're next to something, but they need surfaces touching their front and back, so have very thin baffles up in there for them to squeeze up into. And I'm anxious to put one of those up there amongst the million other things that I want to do at Sugar Creek.
But they're a herd animal, kind of?
Well, they tend to be independent feeders, but they tend to choose the same microhabitat that is similar to other individuals of that same species, so they don't mind snuggling up, and they don't have a lot of option for underneath bark, so your buddies will squeeze in there with you. They choose caves, but only certain parts of the caves. And not necessarily the warm part of caves, because bats like to hibernate, some species do, and they like the cold part of the caves so that they maintain that torpor, that quietness of hibernation. But we think that this communal shelter would be better, and that you're more likely to come in there and see bats at night, fly out of it, and early in the morning fly back into it.
Well, let's go beyond and over and above the flying creatures up there as far as the bats are concerned.
Oh, yeah.
Your plans for the Environmental Center are really far-reaching. I'd like to remind the folks that this is where Dr. Campbell's student, Judd McCollum, found the woolly mammoth tusk up there, and lo and behold, that kind of began a lot of activity up there in our little corner where that creek makes that bend up there. and you have some really great ideas for an environmental study center.
Well, you're right about it. It gave great publicity to activity that I'd already been doing there. I just needed a Judd McCullum to help me out by being one of my students. I've had some marvelous students over the years. And in fact, I need to revisit all of those early names of students that may be local or even far away that introduced me to local things. I live in Springfield, and so when I came here to teach for 1 year, now it's 19 years later, I had to find a creek to keep my, not a lot of caves here, but I still take my students caving, except for a white nose syndrome in bats, but that could be another topic. But so they introduced me to a creek nearby that I just fell in love with. So taking students out there has been really useful to do freshwater mussel clam research. Now that Judd and other students and myself have worked with the world's largest woolly mammoth ever found in the entire world. I mean, this is just amazing that right here in our little county. And a lot of other animals. And this is all working through the Illinois State Museum and the wonderful scientists there. Gosh, I got to give a plug to them. We really do need scientists working behind the scenes laboriously for years, whether we can see whether that's going to be money in our pocket or not. It's actually money in our pocket when we understand the environments, but they're out there helping me. There's archaeological possibilities of study. So if you combine a little bit of geology with the mammoths, throw in the biology of the creek freshwater mussels, throw in archaeology, you got all of your sciences 5 miles from our campus. And I need greenhouses and insectariums to raise some endangered species like prairie walking sticks and Otoe skipper butterfly. I could just go on, and I'm hoping your listeners and the general public around here will remind me of what other things that people would like to do outdoors.
Yeah, upon completion of this, this will not only be a study area for our students and our scientists at Lincoln College, but the public will also have an opportunity to be up there and to go up there and enjoy that area. It's my understanding that you're going to have some parking involved there, set aside area for that, and also will there be an area for them to take a box lunch up there and have a picnic if they want?
Most certainly. Now, maybe not at first.
Initially, right.
We have to develop an entire attitude of how to use a property like that is supervised by a college. Now, but I get to tell people that the college is not just your traditional age students. It includes older people, such as myself, and older. That would be, we used to call it Elder Hostel. I think they're now called Rhodes Scholar, ROADS, Rhodes Scholar, which I think is a great. I'd love for them to come out and use that property. I want elementary kids to use it. I want junior high and high school people there. Well, we'll first establish it maybe in the first year or two, establish things like greenhouses and pavilions. And again, it's an outdoor shelter, an outdoor center, so I don't want too much enclosed. It's off the grid, so we'll have to use alternative energy. But you're absolutely right. We want the general community to have ownership of that too. When I have a bad day, I go out there and eat my lunch there. Well, it's going to be great to have a pavilion and a greenhouse and all of these other things that'll be there. Well, I want other people to do that too. We just have to worry a little bit about security. You're right. We're building a road, improving a road, and getting hopefully a local neighbor. We share, we're main part, the Lincoln College owns most of the property, but a board member, Shirley Edwards, a wonderful lady, is considering donating part of the land to help us with the road. We'll have a 35-car parking lot for a couple of buses. So that's not just for me and my students. We're saying this is going to be a community event.
Well, that's why I wanted to bring that up, because it will really be an enhancement for the enjoyment of the community once this comes to fruition. But you have a lot of neat plans. For instance, this Insectarium.
Yes, thanks.
That's as opposed to sanitarium.
Well, it'd be my sanitarium.
Where I might be headed. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
it's physically. Let's describe the structure.
An elongated Quonset hut without walls. It'll be netting, and so the general environment can come in. So you'll be growing Native American prairie. In fact, I'm looking at a guy that helped me 2 years ago set in a prairie. Bill was, and my students and some faculty and staff helped us put in an acre prairie. Well, we're going to bring part of that prairie inside this elongated greenhouse with netting. It'll have a pond in there and a waterfall and a recycling pump using solar energy. We'll have separate buckets of plants that are the food plants for the caterpillars and the adults of butterflies. We're going to invite the general public to come out and run through our prairie with nets. Oh, it reminds me of the sanitarium part now again. But we'll bring the butterflies into there and release them and raise them. Plus, I want to make deals with the state. There are some scientists that work with the endangered species like Otoe skipper butterfly that's very rare. Well, I want to see if we can raise them and release them back to the proper habitats. Prairie walking stick, there's a number of smaller types of animals that can coexist.
How does a prairie walking stick differ from the traditional walking stick?
Well, when I have that with my students, I usually say, well, they know, so they don't really have to inform me of what they look for in a mate. But yes, it's a different species. We probably have 40 species of walking sticks right here in our state, maybe more, I'm sure. Dr. Gossett at the State Museum is disappointed in me not knowing exactly how many would be here, but and one of them, kind of depending upon our prairie grasses that we tend to remove for farming, and we're losing the food plants for them. Therefore, we're losing that species, and that's one of the things. I don't want to bring back dinosaurs and things with genetic engineering. I'd like to bring things back that humans have been responsible for removing, and maybe we don't have to bring it back from extinction if we can just protect it before it goes extinct. And so, yeah, a prairie walking stick kind of looks like, no one, if somebody said, I'll give you $100 to go find a prairie walking stick, I can, but I'm not going to see it. I'm going to get out there with my net, a cloth net, and just bash a lot of plants in a native area and look through all of that debris that's inside that net, and I'm sure you're going to find a walking stick in there.
You know, it occurs to me, Doctor, that once this thing comes to fruition, that this would also be a draw for our sister educational institutions around, not only just here in the immediate central Illinois, but perhaps from outside the state and so forth. So it might just have some possible commercial spinoff insofar as what people would be spending as they come into the community to come to see this and experience it.
Well, I need you and other people to make that statement because I'm a terrible salesperson. In fact, when I'll go up to a superintendent in schools, I'll go up, I'll say, what can we do for you? And I'm sure they have great ideas because of their budgets being cut short. I would never say to somebody, oh, this is what I'd like for you to do for me, because I just like to serve as a kind of a resource for the local. More than once, we've even talked about my philosophy is leave no child inside. Well, we're getting this little social networking side of not little, but using cell phones and things, a lot of communication, but to an individual person, not to an environment. So I want students to put down their cell phones and come out into the native area. And so I want to pick up those pre-K people, and I want to go through our college. I want people in high schools to hand to students that like the environment. I think maybe Lincoln College could benefit by having students that say, great, we want to be a part of this. So I want them to hand me those students. I want to prepare them well to hand them to other colleges, like you say, here in the state and outside the state. So there'd be a continuum of people who care about environments and alternative energies. This is, again, off the grid. So I want real good solar energy and test out things that work and maybe don't work in an environment. Yes, we got some future. I want scientists to feel comfortable sitting underneath the pavilion and having resources like a well there with water, and I want them to be comfortable to come and do research from I want other colleges. I certainly would invite the Lincoln Christian University and invite high schools and invite Heartland. I mean, there's no college that I dislike. I like the whole philosophy of teaching this age group, and I want them to feel that that's home for them as well. Maybe it's a resource for them.
Which reminds me, certainly we always have our hand out for funds. Any institution does, obviously. This is a special little side issue insofar as Lincoln College is concerned. it would not be improper for anybody to consider thinking about that as they're thinking about what they might want to do with their resources, perhaps when they're planning their estates and so forth. Might be a nice little gesture to leave something in perpetuity for the benefit of students everywhere.
Oh, yes.
For that area up there. As a normal course of a week, Doctor, how often do you take your students up there?
Well, especially better weather. My students have been out
a factor.
Every week for the last 4 weeks. My students have been out there because I'll take an environmental biology out there, and we originally went down to the creek and just introduced the scientific method, and another time we went there to the restored prairie that you walked. We did a line transect study of what plants are growing along there. We're going to monitor this prairie. Now, native prairies, when you plant them, of native grasses and flowers, forbs, don't really reach their full potential until 5, 6, 10, maybe 12 years. But we're monitoring it each year as to what species are growing and where. And so we did that. And just this last week, we went there to see the forest trees, to do an idea. We measured the girth, the circumference of the large sycamore trees in one area, and the canopy width, and calculated some aspects about biomass of trees. I always loved taking them down to what I call the Judd Discovery Site for them to see that an environmental biology student made scientific history in the world by picking up a bone one day and hollering over at me.
You know, it occurs to me, Judith K., as opposed to the study of law or medicine, this is kind of an esoteric subject matter that not everybody has a deep interest in, but those that do are very passionate about it.
Oh.
And
that's
a good thing.
It doesn't have to be professional. Every one of us have a part of our life that needs that. That's what I'm telling. If you got a boring life, if you got desperation, if you're go out there. I want something that's so comfortable to you that you'll go out there and bring a friend, go out there alone, feel secure, and kind of reach back to your kind of early genetics of land use and land. We're a species that grew up in land. We didn't really grow up inside houses as our species. So I would love for people to be so secure out there that this would be an addition to their life, not necessarily a profession.
I want to ask you a personal question.
On air.
Can you remember what the very first word was that you said when Judd said, "What in the world is this?"
Don't. You know, Judd says this story too, and he's convinced me I did say this. So when he reached in and pulled out a section, now Judd's a big guy.
Was he?
And he's holding a probably over 150-pound section of a tusk, and he knows the other pieces are lying at his feet. He can't see them because the creek was too high and too muddy. All of this was tactile sense and pulled up and in, and it was his, and I had nothing to do with teaching him this. It was his parents and previous teachers that set him up to be able to recognize this is not a log. And he held it up, and I'm 15, 20 feet away, and he hollers, "Hey, Doc, look what I got." And we had been talking about mammoths a couple of days earlier on a weekend because he helped cut the trail there, but here's 25 other students around him. And he says, "Hey, Doc, look what I got." And I said, "I'll put that piece of, what is it, piece of rubber, put it back down in the creek." And so he reminds me that that I cannot recognize greatness when I first see it, but he could. And he said that he wasn't putting it down. He was going to walk out of the creek with it, and almost stumbled a couple of times until I recognized, you're right, it's not a piece of rubber. It's significant, and we knew that we actually had to take it out of the water. I've had some paleontologists that say, well, maybe you should have kept it there, but the water was rising. It was one of the lower parts of the year in September, and the water would be coming up, and just by accident, it probably eroded out of the bank a couple of days earlier, and was now available. In another couple of weeks, it would have been shattered and carried downstream. It's just unbelievable.
You think that this mammoth lived in this area then, rather than this having come down the creek?
That's a good point, because we originally say mammoths. I get all my information from Ice Age movie. But right next to the glacier mammoths, well, the glacier was close to us at this at one time, but that was 25,000, 30,000 years ago. So we thought, well, okay, maybe a glacier front was near here. This mammoth lived in the area. It wasn't Sugar Creek then. It would have been a braided stream at the base of the melting of the glacier. And it moved around and died there. But it has some, we've since found more than just tusks. We found the major part of the upper skull with the 2 teeth there, of the zygomatic arch around the ocular area, very fragile bone, intact, in with that bone. So these bones were not rolling around. The skull, the guy died, a
Right
header.
there, at that point.
Yeah, a header. I mean, he's two 12-foot-long tusks that weigh so much. He went into the ground.
Probably just died of tiredness from carrying him around.
And we believe it was an old male. The scientists using the teeth and the tusks tell them it was an old male, about 50 years old. But
how many years?
50? 50, which would be almost maximum in his life. The teeth were well worn, so he's reached the gum line, so he has to mash food versus shred it. And we haven't found the rest of the body. There's no other bones, which would be the majority, so that probably bloated and drifted off. Now, did it drift off a mile? Did it drift off a couple of feet? Was it exposed 5,000 years ago and got deteriorated by weather? We don't know.
Yeah.
But, boy, we got one part of it that tells us pretty much all that the scientists needed to know.
So old Judd one-upped the doctor.
Oh, he did, and he still does. He's a fascinating young man.
Dr. Dennis Campbell, professor at Lincoln College, we appreciate very much your spending our time with us this morning.
Oh, I love
Always
it.
nice to have Denny Campbell come with us. Makes for a great morning. We've been talking about nature this morning, so the closing comment on Viewpoint this morning is the danger is not what nature will do with man, but what man will do with nature. For Viewpoint, thank you very much.